This is called the grammar of nature. 1. The word that has done so much damage. The word is law. Not law in the sense of human legislation, although that is part of the problem, but natural law. The claim that the universe operates under laws and that these laws are binding, that they were issued by something, that they can in principle be transgressed. This claim has colonized science, religion, ethics, education, and political philosophy simultaneously. Its removal is not the removal of a word. It is the dissolution of the conceptual foundation on which the guilt architecture, the authority hierarchy, the transgression framework, and the condition of civilizational helplessness all rest. The word law comes from the Latin lex, itself rooted in legere, to gather, to pick out, to bind. A law gathers and binds. It is issued by an authority. It applies to subjects. It carries the implicit structure of legislator, enforcer, subject, and the threat of punishment for transgression. This structure is not incidental to the word. It is the word's entire grammar. And when the word is applied to the patterns of nature, the law of gravity, the laws of thermodynamics, natural, moral law, the grammar of legislation is imported wholesale into the description of a structure that has no legislator, no enforcement mechanism, and no possibility for transgression. The damage this has done is not merely philosophical. It is psychological, political, and civilizational. If the universe operates by law, then the fundamental nature of reality is coercive. The cosmos issues commands. Creatures are subjects. Deviation is transgression. Transgression is punished. This picture, enacted at the scale of physics, biology, ethics, and theology simultaneously, has placed the human organism in a posture of helplessness before an authority it cannot meet as an equal, cannot question, cannot participate in, can only obey or transgress. The posture is the wound's primary somatic installation. The word law applied to nature is how the wound wrote itself into the organism's relationship with reality itself. 2. Two traditions, one damage. The confusion has a specific history. Two distinct traditions were collapsed into each other at the formation of what we call Western civilization, and the collapse has never been cleanly resolved. The first tradition is the Stoic Roman legal one. The Stoics proposed a lex naturalis, a natural law analogous to human law, authored by the divine logos, applicable universally, binding on all rational creatures. This was not a scientific claim, but a moral and political one. The universe's rational structure is the ground of human obligation. To act in accordance with nature is to obey the divine law. To act against nature is to transgress it, and transgression carries its own punishment in the disorder it produces. This tradition flows directly into Roman law, into medieval Catholic natural theory, and from there into the entire political philosophy of rights, obligations, and legitimate authority that structures Western governance to the present day. The second tradition is the 17th century scientific one, when Kepler, Galileo, Newton, and their successors discovered mathematical regularities in physical behavior. They called these regularities laws, a term that imported the legislative grammar from the first tradition into a domain where it had no business being. Newton's laws of motions are not commands issued to matter. They are descriptions of how matter consistently behaves. There is no moment at which matter considers whether to comply and decides to do so. Gravity does not obey the inverse square relationship. It is that relationship. But the word law was already in place, and its grammar of authority, binding, and compliance came with it. The damage of this collapse from the Stoic tradition, the scientific laws inherited the suggestion of a lawgiver, a rational order behind the regularities that had authored them and to which they testified. From the scientific tradition, the moral laws inherited the apparent empirical solidity of physical regularities, the claim that moral obligations were as objectively real and universally binding as the law of conservation of energy. These two traditions mutually reinforced each other's authority claims while obscuring each other's foundations. The result is what we have now, a civilization that simultaneously believes the universe operates by impersonal physical laws with no lawgiver, and by moral laws that somehow still require compliance and carry the threat of transgression, a position that is structurally incoherent but has been maintained for centuries through the shared authority of the word law. 3. What the grammar of nature actually is. What replaces natural law? Not the absence of pattern. The patterns are real, and nothing in this essay disputes them. What replaces it is the recognition that the patterns are not commands, but grammar. The living, discoverable, inexhaustible structural self-expression of what the Hero Project calls the is ground, operating through the can level encounter into the does level condition. Grammar is the right word, and it is precise. A grammar is not a command. It is not issued by an authority. It is not binding in the sense of obligating a subject. Grammar is the structure of how expression works. The pattern by which a language generates its infinite variety of utterances from a finite set of structural rules. No one commands English to follow its grammar. English is its grammar, in the sense that the grammar is the structural description of how language moves. The grammar is not above the language legislating. It is the language's own self-description seen from outside. The grammar of nature is this: the structural description of how the is ground expresses itself through the can level encounter into the does level condition at every level, at every scale simultaneously, with the same fractal pattern operative at the scale of the atom and the galaxy, the cell and the organism, the moment and the epoch. This grammar was not authored. It was not issued. It cannot be transgressed. It can only be participated in or departed from. And the departure is not transgression, but the condition of suffering. Because departure is a movement away from the ground of genuine aliveness. And the experience of moving away from genuine aliveness is the organism's own signal functioning correctly that something has been missed. The distinction is not subtle. It is the difference between a universe that commands and a universe that expresses, between a reality that threatens and a reality that discloses, between a ground that punishes departure and a ground that remains inexhaustibly available to the organism that returns. The grammar of nature does not punish the organism that ignores it. It does not withdraw when denied. It does not cease to be available when refused. Its inexhaustibility is precisely this. The ground's availability is not conditional on the organism's reception of it. The archer who misses the mark is not punished by a judge. The arrow simply does not arrive where it aimed. 5. What this changes. The replacement of natural law with the grammar of nature is not a terminological preference. It changes three things with structural necessity. It changes the organism's posture toward reality. Under natural law, the organism is a subject before an authority, capable of transgression, threatened by punishment, rendered helpless by the gap between what it is and what the law requires. Under the grammar of nature, the organism is a participant in a living structure, capable of departure, but not of violation, invited by the structure's own self-evidence toward genuine encounter, naturally positioned toward curiosity and discovery, rather than frightened into a corner by the threat of punishment. Curiosity is the organism's natural orientation toward a grammar it can learn. Fear is the organism's conditioned response to a law it might transgress. One of these is the hero system's native disposition. The other is the ego system's installed condition. It changes what suffering is. Under natural law, suffering is punishment, the consequence of transgression, the judgment of authority on deviation. Under the grammar of nature, suffering is structural signal, the organism's own detection, functioning correctly, that something has been missed. The mark has been missed. The arrow has not arrived. The signal is not penal. It is navigational. It says, you have departed from the ground of genuine aliveness, not you are guilty and you must be punished. This distinction is the hinge on which the entire guilt architecture turns. It changes what restoration is. Under natural law, restoration is compliance, returning to obedience, making amends for transgression, seeking forgiveness from the authority that was offended. Under the grammar of nature, restoration is return to genuine encounter. The softening of the ego system's insistence, the availability of the is ground, the organism receiving what is and what is again. Not compliance, not forgiveness, not the lifting of a penalty. The ground was always already there. What restoration restores is the organism's capacity to receive it. 5, the naturally curious organism. Under the grammar of nature, the organism's native relationship to reality is not fear, but wonder. Not helpless subject before an authority, but participant in a discoverable structure that discloses itself to any genuinely attentive observer. The scientist following an anomaly, the child asking the genuine question in the circle, the artist who stays with the encounter until it reveals what it has to show. These are not exceptions to the human condition. They are the human condition operating from its native ground before the guilt architecture of natural law installed the posture of the threatened subject. Krishnamurti saw this with great precision. He observed that the mind, conditioned by authority, by the law's demands for compliance, cannot see freshly. It can only pattern match the present to the known's record of past compliance and deviation. But the mind in genuine encounter with what is, the mind that is not managing its relationship to an authority, receives rather than manages. It is changed by what it meets rather than defending itself against change. This is the naturally curious organism, not the one that has transcended fear, but the one that has been returned to the ground from which fear was never native. The grammar of nature makes this possible because it removes the threat. There is nothing to transgress. There's only the structure, always already expressing itself, always already available, always already more than any single encounter can exhaust. The inexhaustibility is not a promise about the future. It is the structure's own nature. The is ground cannot be depleted, cannot be damaged, cannot be made unavailable by anything that occurs within it. To discover this genuinely in the organism's own encounter with what is the end of the spell. Not permanently, not by an act of will, but in each moment of genuine encounter with the grammar, the posture of the frightened subject before the legislating authority dissolves. And what remains is the participant in a living structure that was never anything other than hospitable.